Hello and welcome back to the paddock. It is the last week of summer break, thank God, and we're back this week with a little history lesson. Today we're talking about the great Niki Lauda. So take a seat, grab your favorite snack and a drink because it's time to go back in time and learn about one of F1's legends.
And what a legend he was. But let's start at the beginning. So, Niki Lauda was born into a rather wealthy industrialist Viennese family on February 22nd, 1949. And honestly, he defied his family's expectations by pursuing a career in racing because they just wanted him to become a businessman and join the family business. And despite that disapproval, he started with a Mini before moving into Formula V and then Porsche and Chevron sports cars. When his career stalled, Lauda took out a $39,000 loan to join the March Formula 2 team in 1971. Severing ties, like truly severing ties, with his family in the process. By 72, he was racing in both Formula 1 and Formula 2, because back then you could still do that, but March's F1 season was a disaster. Unfazed, he took out yet another loan and joined BRM in 73, showing promise despite the team's decline, and to the point where his performance at Monaco caught the attention of Ferrari. And after a recommendation from the Ferrari driver Clay Regazzoni, Ferrari signed Lauda for 1974, paying off his debts as well and launching his iconic career. Now, Ferrari. In the early 70s, they were on the struggle bus. But as soon as Lauda joined in 74, they turned it around. And thanks in part also to Luca di Montezola, who took out a chance on the relatively unknown driver, Niki Lauda. Lauda quickly impressed, securing Ferrari's first win since 1972 at the Spanish GP, and ending the season in fourth overall. In 75, after a slow start, Lauda won 4 out of 5 races once Ferrari introduced an upgraded car in the 312T. He clinched his first world championship at Monza and helped Ferrari win the Constructors' Championship on top of that, for the first time in 11 years, I might add. And that didn't stop him from dominating the start of 1976 too, winning 5 races and building a huge championship lead. However, at the German GP, Lauda's Ferrari crashed, and he was severely injured in a fiery accident. And though he was given last rites at the hospital, against his will, I might add, and he was pissed off at the priest for giving him those rites, but that's a different story, he actually made an incredible comeback just 40 days after that accident at the German GP, finishing 4th in the Italian GP. However, despite his bravery, rival James Hunt caught up in the championship race, and Lauda ultimately withdrew from the rain-soaked Japanese GP, allowing Hunt to win the title by a measly 1 point. And if you want to know more about their rivalry slash friendship, Mel's going to talk about it a bit later. So, in 77, Lauda secured his second world championship, but after left Ferrari due to conflicts with the team, particularly over his new teammate and Ferrari's decision to run a untested driver in a third car, because third cars used to be a thing.
Now, going into 1978, Niki joined Brabham Alfa Romeo for a small $1 million salary. However, the 2 seasons he raced with them were not so successful as one would hope. His time with the team was mainly remembered for his one race win in the Brabham BT46B, a radical car design known as the fan car. In this car, they won its first and only race at the Swedish Grand Prix, and unfortunately, the team were not able to use this car again in F1 due to the other teams protesting the fans' car legality, and the team owner honestly didn't want to fight the battle over the car. However, luckily for them, the win in Sweden stayed official. Now the team bought the Brabham BT46 Alfa Romeo at the third race of the season. However, it went through a lot of issues to say the least. Niki was forced to DNF 9 out of the 14 races, and apart from his win in Sweden, his other best results were a second place in Monaco and in Great Britain, and third place at the Netherlands Grand Prix. The following season in 1979 was somewhat the same for Niki and the team. Unfortunately, there was no pace in the car, and they faced again a lot of DNFs. At the Canadian Grand Prix, during one of the practice sessions, he expressed desire to retire immediately since he no longer had desire to, quote, continue the silliness of driving around in circles. And I can just hear him saying that in his like tone and everything, so it doesn't surprise me that he said silliness in that context.
And he wasn't joking too, because he literally decided to step away from Formula One in a very dramatic fashion after the Canadian GP. And as Mel said, he didn't sugarcoat anything when he told Brabham team boss Bernie Ecclestone that he was done driving in those circles. Instead, Lauda was ready to focus on new ventures, such as building his own airline. And it was a bold move, not gonna lie, but fitting for a man who never shied away from charting his own path. I mean, I talked about the German GP accident and him rejoining the championship race 40 days later. Same type of vibe. During his retirement, he mainly focused on his entrepreneurship ventures, but more on those in a bit.
And going into 1982, Niki made his grand return to F1 for a humble $3 million salary. Again, no big deal. So demure, so cutesy of him. This time around, the return was with McLaren, and Niki had a successful testing session with the team, but the problem was the team sponsors, Marlboro. I can never pronounce this, side note, so I'm sorry about my mumble jumble with that. They felt like he may not be capable of driving the car, so of course Niki had to prove himself to the sponsors and was able to prove himself by winning the third race of the season at the Long Beach Grand Prix. Now, before the start of the season, Niki was also organizing the driver's strike. Apparently, during this time, there was a requirement change in obtaining the super license, and of course, Niki felt like it could just hinder drivers' negotiating positions in the future. So all the drivers, aside from Theo Fabi, had barricaded themselves in the suite at the Sunnyside Hotel until they won. Now, the 1983 season was a winless season for Niki and McLaren, unfortunately, with his best finish being second at the Long Beach Grand Prix. Onto the 1984 season, he won his third driver championship by a whopping half point over his teammate Prost. And fun fact, Niki initially didn't want Prost as his teammate as he saw Prost as a much faster rival. But later, they had a closer relationship, and Niki has stated that being the Frenchman was a big motivator to win. Ahead of the 1985 season, Niki had signed a letter of intent to leave McLaren for Renault. However, the agreement never went through and Niki stayed with the team, McLaren. However, the season was another disappointment for the driver and team again, and he had 11 DNFs out of 14 races this season. His only win was at the Dutch Grand Prix, where it was a fast finish battle with, again, his teammate Prost. Now, at the Australian Grand Prix in 1985, Niki had announced that he would be retiring at the end of the season, and his final race in the sport was at the Australian Grand Prix. At his final race, he qualified in 15th and was able to have a steady lead by lap 53. However, this was short-lived because on lap 57, Niki crashed out at the end of the Brabham Straight due to brake failure.
Now, helmets, while important at F1, most of the time drivers don't really have special helmets. However, especially design-wise. However, with Niki, because of his accident, he had truly special helmets. But let's start with his helmets pre-accident. And honestly, as with every driver, his helmet design evolved over the years, but he started out with a simple yet bold red look, featuring his full name on both sides and the Raiffeisen Bank logo on the chin. However, as I mentioned, he needed a special helmet after his Nürburgring crash because of his burns that he sustained on his face. Therefore, he switched to a modified AGV helmet with special lining to avoid irritating his burned scalp. When he returned to racing with McLaren in '82, he switched things up yet again. This time, his helmet was white, proudly displaying the red L logo of his airline. Talk about free advertising. When Lauda returned to racing with McLaren in '82, he switched things up yet again. This time, his helmet was white, proudly displaying the red L logo of his airline, Lauda Air, in place of his name. Talk about free advertising. Paramellet, his personal sponsor, claimed the top spot. Then, from 83 to 85, he reverted the red and white colors, bringing back a nod to his original design.
And in 1993, Niki had made his return into F1, but this time in a different way. He returned to the sport in a managerial position when Luca de Montezemolo, I way butchered that, so I'm sorry once again, offered Niki a consulting role at Ferrari. Many years later, in 2001, Niki became the team principal of Jaguar F1 team. However, the team did not improve during the season at all, and the team, along with Niki, was made redundant at the end of 2002. Almost a decade later, in September 2012, Niki was appointed non-executive chairman of Mercedes-AMG Petronas Motorsport, where there Niki also took part of the negotiations to sign Lewis onto the team for a 3-year deal in 2013, and we all saw how successful that was.
As I mentioned, he also started an airline, and that wasn't the only thing. Because after retiring in '85, he truly put his heart and soul into Lauda Air. And of course, as Mel mentioned, he still stayed connected with racing as a consultant for Ferrari. The interesting part with Lauda Air, though, is that in 1999, he sold his shares because they merged with Air Berlin, a now defunct German airline. However, he didn't let that be his end-all, because he launched a new airline called Niki in 2003, which later also merged with Air Berlin in 2011. And in 2016, he took over Emira Air, rebranding it as Lauda Motion, and later acquiring Niki brand after Air Berlin's bankruptcy in 2017. Now, why was he so obsessed with aviation? Well, that was due to him being a licensed pilot and often flying his airline's planes. But that wasn't all, because as we now know, he's a racing legend. So, of course, he was inducted into the International Motorsports Hall of Fame in '93 and served as a F1 commentator even for RTL from 1996, though he faced controversy for using a slur in 2010. Known for his red cap, which covered the burn from his Nürburgring crash, Lauda earned millions in sponsorship deals for the space on his cap. And his distinct look earned him the nickname The Rat, even if that nickname is somewhat derogatory, and honestly, it plays into a lot of like the old school F1 nicknames, because they are usually very cold. I mean, for example, his rival James Hunt was known as Hunt the Shunt. And of course, there are also honors when it comes to Niki Lauda, because he was a racing legend. So, for example, he was honored with a stamp by the Austrian Post in 2005, and ESPN ranked him 22nd among top drivers of all time. Though, in my opinion, that's a bit low, but we'll let that stand. He also authored 5 books, including The Art of Science of Grand Prix Driving and To Hell and Back, which was basically an autobiography on his crash, more or less. He wrote that book, actually, with the help of journalist Herbert Wolker. Because he was such a legend, and especially because his rivalry with James Hunt, which we didn't really cover in this episode, at least not in the detail I would have wanted to cover it, because it's just so big, so interesting, it actually deserves its own episode. But if you want to know more about that, check out the movie Rush, which we actually did a review on. It's basically a movie covering the 1976 season. And it even earned a BAFTA nomination for Best Supporting Actor. And Lauda himself made a very brief cameo at the end of the film, reflecting on Hunt's death. Although Lauda did say it was only about 80% accurate. Lauda said, "When I heard he died at 45 of a heart attack, I wasn't surprised. Just sad." This is all because, despite their very fierce competition, Lauda admitted Hunt was one of the few people he truly liked, respected, and even envied. But that wasn't all of him in pop culture, because he also appeared in an episode of Mayday titled Niki Lauda, Testing the Limits, which explored the tragedy of Lauda Air Flight 004 in it. Lauda remarked that running an airline was more challenging than winning 3 Formula One championships. Nevertheless, he didn't give up on his aviation dreams.
Now, aside from his F1 career, his entrepreneurships and everything, Niki is also a man of many languages, being fluent in German, English, and Italian. I personally find it impressive when people are trilingual or more. He married his former wife, Marlene Naus, in 1978, and both of them had 2 sons, Matthias, who became a racing driver himself, and Luca, who became his brother's manager. Now, unfortunately, Marlene and Niki did later divorce in 1991, but Niki did remarry to Bridget Wisinger, who was a flight attendant for his airline later on. And in 2005, she donated a kidney to Niki after his kidney that he had received from his brother failed. And I think that's really, really sweet and a sign of true love right there, because you can't donate an organ just to anybody in the world. Now, Niki and Bridget had 2 children, twins to be exact, Max and Mia.
On May 20th, 2019, Niki passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 70 while receiving kidney dialysis at the University Hospital of Zurich. His health had been declining for years, worsened by a lung injury from his 76 accident. And despite undergoing a double lung transplant the year before, along with 2 previous kidney transplants that Mel covered, Lauda's body just couldn't fully recover, which is understandable, honestly. But thankfully, he was surrounded by his family in his final days. Now, of course, because he was such a legend, the racing world paid heartfelt tributes to Lauda during that year's Monaco GP. Drivers, teams, and fans even honored him throughout the weekend, with many donning red caps, Lauda's iconic post-accident look. The Mercedes team painted their halo device red with a message, "Niki, we miss you." And Haas added his name and the years of his life to their car engine cover. And both Lewis Hamilton and Sebastian Vettel wore special helmets in Lauda's honor. And when Hamilton won the race, he dedicated his victory to Niki Lauda. Now, of course, his funeral was equally well attended, as it was held at St. Stephen's Cathedral in Vienna. And while it was a solemn event, I mean, funerals usually are, a lot of racing legends such as Gerhard Berger, Jackie Stewart, Alan Prost, and Lewis Hamilton attended, as well as other public figures such as Arnold Schwarzenegger and Austrian leaders. And following his wishes, Lauda was laid to rest in Heiligenstädter Friedhof, wearing his Ferrari racing suit from 1974 to 1977. And honestly, Niki is remembered as one of the greatest Formula One drivers of all time, a true legend both on and off the track.
And to close out the episode, we have a quote for you from none other, of course, Niki Lauda. "My life is worth more than a title." And of course, it is, because we see that the comeback is always better than the setback.
Truly. And honestly, because Lauda is one of my favorite old school drivers, especially for his rivalry with Hunt and his comeback and his post-racing career, this episode was very special for me. Let us know who you'd like us to cover next Everywhere on socials, we are Paddock Girl Podcast, except on Twitter/X. We're Paddock Girls Pod. Thanks for joining us in the paddock, and see you guys next week in Zandvoort. Bye.